I was in my home office reviewing quarterly reports when I heard the doorbell ring at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday in February. Opening the front door of my house in Cascade Ridge, Colorado, I found myself face to face with a woman holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. She had that particular haircut, the one that screamed she wanted to speak to the manager, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Derek Vaughn?" she asked, though it sounded more like an accusation than a question. "That's me," I replied, pulling my sweater tighter against the cold air rushing in. "I'm Karren Kimble, president of the Cascade Ridge Homeowners Association. I'm here to inform you that you're in violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA Covenant." She thrust a paper toward me with such force I thought she might paper cut me. I took the notice and glanced at it. My eyebrows shot up as I read the violation. Excessive snow accumulation on roof exceeding 12 inches. Fine, $500. Additional fines of $250 per day until remedied. "You're fining me for snow on my roof?" I asked, unable to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "The covenant is very clear, Mr. Vaughn. Snow accumulation poses a risk to the aesthetic integrity of our community and represents a potential liability issue." Karen's voice had that practiced quality of someone who had rehearsed this speech in the mirror. I looked past her at my roof. Sure enough, there was probably close to 14 inches of snow up there. We had gotten hammered with storms over the past week, and yes, I hadn't gotten around to clearing it off yet. But neither had most of my neighbors. "Mrs. Kimble, everyone on this street has snow on their roof. I can see Mr. Patterson's place from here, and he's got nearly 2 feet. Mr. Patterson cleared his roof yesterday afternoon. I personally verified it." She sniffed. "This is your first notice. The fine is effective immediately, and the daily penalties will begin accruing tomorrow if the violation is not corrected." "This is ridiculous," I said, but she was already walking back down my driveway to her silver Lexus. I closed the door and reread the notice. $500 for snow on my roof. I had lived in Cascade Ridge for 3 years now, ever since I moved my snow removal business, Alpine Solutions, from Denver to this mountain community an hour west of the city. The HOA had always been a bit uptight, but this was pushing into absurd territory. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Marcus, my operations manager at Alpine Solutions. "Hey boss, we've got a problem with the Cascade Ridge contract," Marcus said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "They're demanding we do an extra pass on all the streets today, even though we were just there last night. The HOA president is threatening to withhold payment if we don't comply within 2 hours. I rubbed my temples. "Let me guess. Karren Kimble. That's the one. She's called the office 4 times this morning, said the streets aren't up to her standards." "Our standards exceed the contract specifications by 20%, Marcus. You know that." "I know that, but she doesn't seem to care. She's saying she'll recommend the HOA switch to a different company next year if we don't jump when she says jump." I thought about this for a moment. The Cascade Ridge contract was significant, bringing in about $300,000 annually. We plowed all the community streets, the parking areas, the walking paths, and maintained the snow removal for the community center. It was one of our anchor contracts, the kind that kept the lights on during summer when we had to pivot to other services. "Do the extra pass," I said finally. "But document everything. Time stamps, photos, the works. I want a record showing we're exceeding our contractual obligations." "You got it. You okay, Derek? You sound stressed." "Just dealing with HOA nonsense on the personal front too. I'll fill you in later." After I hung up, I stared at the violation notice again. Something about this felt personal. Karren Kimble had been president of the HOA for about 8 months, taking over after the previous president, a reasonable guy named Tom, moved to Arizona. Since her election, she had been on a crusade to restore standards to Cascade Ridge, which apparently meant making everyone's life miserable with petty violations and arbitrary rule enforcement. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the HOA portal. Sure enough, there were no other violations posted for snow on roofs in the past week, just mine. I took screenshots of every property on my street using Google Maps Street View, noting the dates. Most showed comparable or worse snow accumulation. The next morning, I called a local handyman service and paid them $200 to clear my roof. It took them about an hour, and when they finished, my roof was completely clear, gleaming dark shingles visible for the first time in weeks. I took photos from every angle, time-stamped and geotagged, then submitted them through the HOA portal with a dispute of the fine. I cited selective enforcement and requested documentation showing similar violations being issued to other homeowners. 3 days later, I received a response. The fine was upheld, and I now owed an additional $500 for failure to respond appropriately to HOA communications. According to Karen's email, my dispute was considered confrontational and not in keeping with the community spirit of Cascade Ridge. I called the HOA office directly. A bored-sounding woman named Janet answered. "I need to speak with Karren Kimble," I said. "She's not available right now. Can I take a message? This is Vaughn. I need to discuss my recent violations and fines." "Oh, Mr. Vaughn." "Yes, Mrs. Kimble left specific instructions about your account. All communications must be in writing through the portal. She won't be taking calls from you." "Excuse me. She can't just refuse to speak with homeowners." "I'm just telling you what she told me, sir. Is there anything else?" I hung up, my frustration mounting. This was getting out of hand. $1,000 in fines for snow on my roof and apparently hurting Karen's feelings with my dispute. That afternoon, Marcus called again. "Derek, we've got another situation with Cascade Ridge." My stomach sank. "What now?" "Karren Kimble is claiming we damaged a mailbox during plowing operations. She's demanding we pay $2,000 for a replacement and threatening to sue for negligence." "Which mailbox?" "Hers. Of course it was. Send me photos of her mailbox from before and after our last service." "Already done. I emailed them to you 5 minutes ago. Derek, there's no damage. Her mailbox looks exactly the same as it did before we plowed." I opened my email and examined the photos. Marcus was right. The mailbox was pristine, a fancy brick and copper affair that probably cost $2,000 when it was installed. "There wasn't a scratch on it." "She's lying," I said. "Yeah, I figured that out. What do you want me to do? Send her a formal response denying the claim?" "Include the photos with timestamps. If she wants to pursue it, she can take it up with our insurance company, who will laugh her out of the room." "Done. But Derek, I'm worried about next year's contract. She's making it clear she's going to push the HOA board to go with someone else." "Let me worry about that. You just keep doing the excellent work you're doing. Document everything and don't let her intimidate you." After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and thought about the situation. Karren clearly had it out for me, but I couldn't figure out why. I barely knew the woman. We had exchanged maybe 3 sentences before she showed up at my door with that violation notice. Then it clicked. About a month ago, there had been an HOA meeting where they discussed the snow removal contract. I hadn't attended. I rarely went to those meetings because they were usually boring affairs about landscaping and paint colors. But I had received the minutes via email. There had been a motion to put the snow removal contract out for bid, proposed by Karren Kimble. The motion had failed by a vote of 4-3, with the majority noting that Alpine Solutions had consistently provided excellent service at competitive rates. Karren had wanted to replace my company, and she had been outvoted. Now she was retaliating, both against me personally and against my business. The next week brought 2 more violations. One for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection, which was technically true because I had forgotten to bring them in before heading to the office. That was a $250 fine. The other was for unauthorized vehicle parking, because I had parked my company truck in my driveway overnight. Another $500. The truck violation was particularly galling because the covenant allowed commercial vehicles under 10,000 pounds to be parked in driveways. My truck was well under that limit. When I pointed this out in my dispute, Karren responded that my truck had commercial signage that exceeded acceptable size limits. The covenant specified that commercial signage on vehicles parked in driveways couldn't exceed 12 square inches. My company logo was probably around 100 square inches. I measured every commercial vehicle I could find in Cascade Ridge over the next few days. I found a real estate agent with signage covering her entire rear window, a plumber with a massive logo on his van, and a landscaping company truck with wraps on both sides. None of them had violations. I compiled all this evidence and requested a hearing with the HOA board. It was my right under the bylaws, and even Karren couldn't deny it without exposing herself to liability. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, on a Tuesday evening at the community center. In the meantime, I removed the magnetic signs from my truck when I parked it at home and made sure my trash cans were tucked away in the garage within minutes of collection. Marcus kept me updated on the Cascade Ridge contract. Karren had called twice more with frivolous complaints, once claiming that we had tracked snow onto someone's driveway, and another time insisting that we had plowed at 3 in the morning and disturbed residents. Our GPS logs showed we had plowed at 6 in the afternoon and hadn't been anywhere near residential driveways. "She's trying to build a case against us," Marcus said during one of our calls. "She wants documentation of complaints so she can present it to the board. Keep doing what you're doing." Paper trail on everything. I'm handling this. The night before the hearing, I prepared my presentation. I had photos, timestamps, GPS data, covenant citations, and evidence of selective enforcement spanning 3 months. I had statements from neighbors who confirmed they had never received violations for the same issues I was being fined for. I even had an analysis from a roofing contractor showing that 14 inches of snow on my roof type was well within safety margins and posed no risk to the structure or surrounding properties. I walked into the community center on Tuesday evening feeling prepared. The board consisted of 7 members, including Karren as president. I recognized most of them. Bob Morris, the vice president, who owned an insurance agency in town; Lisa Chen, the treasurer, who was a CPA; David Paulson, the secretary, a retired teacher; and 3 at-large members, Patricia Hunt, Michael Torres, and Jennifer Wu. They were all decent people as far as I knew, reasonable and community-minded. Karren sat at the center of the table at the front of the room, and when I walked in, her expression could have frozen water. "Mr. Vaughn," she said coldly, "please sit down. We'll hear your appeal regarding the violations and fines assessed against your property at 2847 Mountain View Drive." I sat in the chair facing the board. There were about a dozen other residents scattered around the room, curious about the proceedings. "Before we begin," Karren continued, "I want to remind everyone that this board takes covenant enforcement very seriously. We have rules for a reason, and those rules apply to everyone equally. I bit back a response. Let her talk. I would present my evidence and the board would see the truth. Mr. Vaughn, you have 30 minutes to present your case, Bob Morris said, checking his watch. I stood and connected my laptop to the projector. Thank you. I'll try to be concise. For the next 20 minutes, I walked through each violation, showing evidence of selective enforcement, providing context for why the violations were either incorrect or unjustly applied, and demonstrating that I had complied with covenant requirements. I showed photos of other properties with identical or worse conditions that had received no violations. I presented the roofing contractor's analysis. I showed the actual measurements of my commercial vehicle signage compared to the covenant requirements and other vehicles in the community. The board members listened attentively, taking notes. Patricia Hunt asked several clarifying questions, and Michael Torres requested copies of my roofing analysis, which I provided. When I finished, Karen's face was red. Mr. Vaughn has presented a very slick presentation, but it doesn't change the facts. He violated the covenants multiple times. The fines are appropriate and will stand. I'd like to hear from the rest of the board, Lisa Chen said quietly. This seems like a lot of fines for relatively minor issues, and the evidence of selective enforcement is concerning. There's no selective enforcement, Karen snapped. I inspect properties regularly, and I issue violations when I find them. When was the last time you inspected Mr. Patterson's property? I asked. Karen glared at me. You're not allowed to ask questions, Mr. Vaughn. This isn't a trial. Actually, under Robert's Rules of Order, he is allowed to ask relevant questions during his appeal, David Paulson said, flipping through a book. Mr. Vaughn has the floor. 2 weeks ago, Karen said through gritted teeth. And what were the snow conditions at that time? I don't recall specifically. According to weather records, we had received 16 inches of snow in the 3 days prior to your inspection. Mr. Patterson's roof has a similar pitch to mine and would have had comparable accumulation. Yet you stated that he had cleared his roof when you issued my violation. I pulled up a satellite image dated the same day. This image, taken the same day you issued my violation, shows significant snow accumulation on Mr. Patterson's roof. Several board members leaned forward to look at the screen. This is ridiculous, Karen said. We're not going to sit here while Mr. Vaughn tries to make this about everyone else's property. He violated the rules, end of story. Actually, Mrs. Kimble, this is exactly what we're going to do, Jennifer Wu said. This is an appeal hearing, and Mr. Vaughn has the right to present evidence that the rules are being applied unfairly. I move that we table this discussion and have an independent review of Mr. Vaughn's violations, Bob Morris said. Second, Lisa Chen added. We don't need an independent review, Karen protested. I'm the president, and I'm telling you these fines are legitimate. With all due respect, Karen, you're one vote on this board, not a dictator, Michael Torres said. All in favor of tabling the decision and requesting an independent review. 6 hands went up. Only Karen stayed down. Motion carries, Bob said. Mr. Vaughn will suspend collection of the fines pending the review. You should hear back from us within 30 days. I thanked the board and gathered my materials. As I was leaving, Karen caught up to me in the parking lot. You think you're clever, don't you? She hissed. Coming in here with your fancy presentation, trying to make me look bad. I'm just defending myself against unjust fines, Mrs. Kimble. You haven't seen anything yet. I will make your life in this community hell, and your company. I'm going to make sure Alpine Solutions never plows another street in Cascade Ridge. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise. She turned on her heel and stalked back to the community center. I sat in my truck for a moment, processing what had just happened. Karren had essentially admitted that she was targeting me personally. That was useful information. The next morning, I got a call from my attorney, Richard Chen. I had sent him all the documentation from the HOA situation the day before, asking for his opinion. "Derek, this is pretty cut and dried harassment and selective enforcement," Richard said. "You have an excellent case if you want to pursue legal action against the HOA. What would that look like? You could file a complaint seeking injunctive relief to prevent further violations from being issued without proper cause, and you could sue for the fines already assessed plus attorney fees. Given the evidence you've compiled, I'd say you have about a 90% chance of prevailing." "What about her threat regarding my business? That's trickier. She hasn't actually done anything yet beyond making threats, but if she does attempt to interfere with your contract, that could be tortious interference, which is a serious civil matter. So we wait and see. For now, yes. But document everything. Every communication, every threat, every action. If she escalates, we'll be ready." Over the next 2 weeks, Karren went silent. No new violations, no harassment, nothing. I started to think maybe the board hearing had scared her into backing off. Then Marcus called on a Friday afternoon. "Derek, you need to see this." "See what?" "Check your email. The HOA just sent out a notice to all residents about the snow removal contract." I pulled up my email on my computer. There was a message from the Cascade Ridge HOA with the subject line, "Important community notice regarding snow removal services." The email, signed by Karren Kimble, claimed that there had been numerous complaints about Alpine Solutions snow removal services, including property damage, inadequate plowing, and disruptive operations at unreasonable hours. It stated that the board would be holding a special meeting in 1 week to discuss terminating the contract with Alpine Solutions and seeking bids from other providers. "This is libelous," I said. "None of this is true." "I know that, and you know that, but everyone in Cascade Ridge is reading it right now and thinking we're a terrible company. Forward this to Richard Chen immediately. I'm calling an emergency meeting with the board." I sent emails to every board member except Karren, attaching the documentation I had compiled showing that every complaint Karren had made about Alpine Solutions was either false or exaggerated. I requested an emergency meeting before the scheduled contract discussion. Bob Morris called me back within an hour. "Derek, I got your email. This is concerning. I had no idea Karren was planning to send that message or call a special meeting. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning at 9? I'll be there." The next morning, I met with Bob, Lisa, and David at Bob's insurance office. I walked them through the entire timeline of interactions with Karren, from my personal violations to the harassment of my company. "This explains a lot," Lisa said. "Karren's been pushing hard to change snow removal companies, but she's never given us a clear reason why. Now I'm wondering if this is personal." "It absolutely is," I said. She told me directly in the parking lot after the hearing that she was going to make sure Alpine Solutions never worked in Cascade Ridge again. "That's wildly inappropriate," David said. "She's using her position as HOA president to pursue a personal vendetta. What can we do about it?" Bob asked. "You can call a vote of no confidence," I suggested, "or you can demand she recuse herself from any decisions involving my property or my company." "We need to talk to the other board members," Lisa said. "This has gone too far." They scheduled an emergency board meeting for Monday evening without telling Karren the real purpose. She thought it was going to be the special meeting to discuss the Alpine Solutions contract. When Monday arrived, I showed up at the community center but waited outside. Bob had told me they needed to handle this internally first, but he would call me in if necessary. Through the windows, I could see the board assembled around the table. Karren looked confident, shuffling papers, and clearly preparing to present her case against my company. Bob called the meeting to order and immediately deviated from the agenda. Before we discuss the snow removal contract, we need to address a serious concern that has been brought to the attention of several board members. Karren's expression shifted from confidence to confusion. What concern? It's come to our attention that you may be using your position as president to pursue personal grievances against a homeowner and his business, specifically Derek Vaughn and Alpine Solutions. That's absurd, Karren said, but her voice was shaky. I'm simply enforcing the covenants and holding our contractors accountable. Lisa spoke up. Karren, we've reviewed the violations you issued to Mr. Vaughn. We've also reviewed similar conditions at other properties during the same time periods. The evidence strongly suggests selective enforcement. Additionally, David added, we've reviewed the complaints you've claimed about Alpine Solutions. Our independent review shows that none of these complaints came through official channels. In fact, when we contacted the residents you claimed had complained, they had nothing but positive things to say about the snow removal service. Karren's face went from red to pale. I don't have to justify my decisions to you. I'm the president. You absolutely do have to justify your decisions, Bob said firmly. You serve at the pleasure of this board and the community. You're not a monarch. Jennifer Wu pulled out a document. I've prepared a motion of no confidence in Karren Kimble's leadership as HOA president, citing abuse of authority, selective enforcement of covenants, and using her position for personal retaliation. Do I have a second? Second, Michael Torres said immediately. This is outrageous, Karren shouted, standing up. You can't do this to me. Sit down, Karren, Bob said. All in favor of the motion of no confidence, 6 hands went up. The motion passes. Karren, you're removed as president effective immediately. Bob, as vice president, will assume the role of acting president until we hold new elections. Karren grabbed her purse and papers, her hands shaking. You're all going to regret this. I'll sue the HOA. I'll sue every one of you personally. That's your right, Lisa said calmly. But the decision stands. Karren stormed out of the community center, nearly knocking over a chair on her way. Bob stepped outside and waved me in. Derek, come on in. We owe you an apology. I entered the community center and sat down at the table with the board. On behalf of the HOA, I want to formally apologize for the treatment you've received, Bob said. All fines issued against your property are hereby voided. We're also issuing a formal apology and retraction of the email sent regarding Alpine Solutions. I appreciate that, I said. I want to be clear. I have no ill will toward the HOA or this community. I've enjoyed living here, and my company takes pride in the work we do for Cascade Ridge. We know, Patricia Hunt said, and we value that work. We'd like to renew your contract for another 3 years if you're willing. I'm willing, but I'd like some assurances that this kind of situation won't happen again. Fair enough, Bob said. We're implementing new oversight procedures for covenant enforcement. No single board member will have unilateral authority to issue violations. There will be a review process and an appeal mechanism that's more transparent. We spent the next hour discussing the contract renewal and the new enforcement procedures. By the time I left, I felt confident that the situation had been resolved appropriately. But Karren wasn't done yet. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing Karren Kimble. She was suing me personally for defamation, claiming that I had made false statements about her to the HOA board that resulted in her removal as president. She was seeking $250,000 in damages. I forwarded the lawsuit to Richard Chen. He called me an hour later, laughing. "Derek, this is the most frivolous lawsuit I've seen in years. Everything you said to the board was documented truth. She has no case." "Can she really tie me up in court over this, though?" "She can file a lawsuit, but I'll file a motion to dismiss based on the evidence. A judge will throw this out in about 30 seconds. And then we're going to counterclaim for malicious prosecution, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." "Will that go anywhere?" "Oh yes. Karren's created a paper trail of harassment, false allegations, and retaliation. We're going to enjoy this." Richard filed the motion to dismiss, along with a comprehensive response that included every piece of evidence I had compiled. The judge scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, word spread through Cascade Ridge about what had happened. I started getting calls and messages from neighbors expressing support. Several of them shared their own stories of petty violations and harassment from Karren during her tenure as president. A pattern emerged of Karren targeting anyone she perceived as challenging her authority or not sufficiently deferential. One neighbor, Sarah Martinez, told me that Karren had fined her 6 times in 3 months for violations of the landscaping standards, even though Sarah's yard was professionally maintained and identical to the yards around her. The only difference: Sarah had voted against Karren in the election for HOA president. Another neighbor, Tom Bradford, shared that Karren had tried to prevent him from installing solar panels on his roof, claiming they violated the architectural standards. When Tom presented evidence that the covenant explicitly allowed solar panels, Karren issued him a violation for unauthorized construction, even though his permits were all in order. The more I heard, the more I realized that Karren's targeting of me wasn't unique. She had been abusing her authority systematically, turning the HOA into her personal fiefdom where she could punish anyone who crossed her. The hearing for the lawsuit arrived on a cold March morning. I met Richard at the Boulder County Courthouse, where the case had been filed. Karren was there with her attorney, a nervous-looking young man who kept adjusting his tie. The judge, Honorable Margaret Steinberg, reviewed the motion to dismiss and the supporting evidence. She asked Karren's attorney if he had any response to the documentation showing that everything I had said was true. "Your Honor, the issue isn't whether the statements were true, but whether Mr. Vaughn had the right to share this information with the HOA board without Miss Kimble's knowledge or consent," the attorney argued. Judge Steinberg looked at him over her reading glasses. "Counsel, are you seriously arguing that a homeowner doesn't have the right to present evidence to his HOA board during an official hearing?" "Well, Your Honor, when that evidence is used to damage someone's reputation." "That's not defamation, that's accountability," Judge Steinberg said. "Motion to dismiss is granted. This lawsuit is frivolous and borders on harassment. Miss Kimble, I strongly suggest you consider the consequences before filing any additional litigation against Mr. Vaughn." Karren stood up, her face contorted with rage. "This is unbelievable. He destroyed my reputation and you're just going to let him get away with it." "Miss Kimble, according to the evidence presented, you destroyed your own reputation through your actions. Mr. Vaughn simply documented those actions and defended himself. That's not defamation. We're done here." As we left the courtroom, Richard pulled me aside. "Now we file the counterclaim." "Are you ready to take this all the way?" "Do it," I said. "She needs to understand that actions have consequences." Richard filed the counterclaim that afternoon, seeking actual damages for the time and expense I had incurred defending myself, punitive damages for Karren's malicious conduct, and attorney fees. We asked for $100,000 total. Karren's attorney withdrew from the case a week later. I suspected he realized he was representing someone with no viable defense and a terrible fact pattern. Karren tried to represent herself for a while, filing rambling motions that the court rejected for various procedural failures. Finally, 2 months after we filed the counterclaim, her new attorney reached out to Richard to discuss settlement. "They're offering $10,000, Richard told me over the phone. "That's insulting considering what she put me through." I told them as much. I countered at $75,000. "We'll probably settle somewhere around $50,000. The negotiations took another month, but eventually we reached a settlement. Karren agreed to pay me $50,000, issue a formal written apology, and sign an agreement never to contact me or interfere with my business in any way. If she violated the agreement, the entire $100,000 judgment would become due immediately, plus additional penalties. The apology letter arrived via certified mail in June. It was brief and clearly written by her attorney, but it acknowledged that she had abused her authority as HOA president, selectively enforced rules against me, made false statements about my company, and caused me significant harm through her actions. I framed it and hung it in my office, not out of spite, but as a reminder that standing up to bullies, even when they have institutional authority, is worth it. The HOA board held new elections in May, and Bob Morris was elected as the permanent president. The new board implemented comprehensive reforms to the covenant enforcement process, including a requirement that all violations be reviewed by at least 2 board members before being issued, an independent appeals process, and regular audits to ensure fair application of the rules. Alpine Solutions not only got the contract renewal, but the board increased our compensation by 15% in recognition of our excellent service. They also asked us to take on additional responsibilities, including snow removal for individual driveways on a voluntary, opt-in basis for homeowners who wanted the service. The business grew significantly over the following year. Several other HOAs in the area heard about what happened and reached out about contracts. Apparently, word had spread that we were a reliable company that could handle even difficult clients professionally. Our revenue increased by 40%, and I had to hire 3 additional staff members and buy 2 more trucks. But the real victory came in August when I was working in my yard and my neighbor, Ed Thompson, came over to chat. "Derek, I just wanted to say thanks," Ed said. "For what?" "For standing up to Karren. That woman made a lot of us miserable, but nobody wanted to rock the boat. You showed us that we don't have to accept abuse from people in authority just because they have a title." "I just didn't want to pay unjust fines," I said with a laugh. "It was more than that. You documented everything, you followed the rules, and you held her accountable. That takes courage. The whole community is better off now." We talked for a while longer, and after Ed left, I stood in my yard looking at my house. The snow had long since melted, and summer flowers were blooming in the beds my wife had planted before she passed away 2 years ago. I had moved to Cascade Ridge for a fresh start, to build my business and find some peace in the mountains. I hadn't expected to end up in a war with the HOA president, but sometimes life throws you challenges you don't anticipate. The key is how you respond. You can roll over and accept unfair treatment, or you can stand up, document the truth, and fight back through proper channels. I chose to fight back, and it had worked out better than I could have imagined. Not just for me, but for the whole community. Sometimes one person standing up to a bully gives everyone else the courage to do the same. A few months later, in October, I ran into Karren at the grocery store in town. She was alone, pushing a cart and looking smaller somehow, diminished. When she saw me, she quickly turned down another aisle. I let her go. There was nothing left to say. I had heard through the community gossip mill that she had put her house up for sale and was moving to Grand Junction to be closer to her daughter. Good. Cascade Ridge would be better off without her, and maybe a fresh start would help her realize that wielding petty authority over others isn't a path to happiness. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Boss, just got word. We landed the contract for Summit Creek HOA. That's another $200K annually. This company is blowing up." I smiled and texted back my congratulations. Alpine Solutions had come a long way from the small operation I started 5 years ago with one truck and a lot of determination. Now, we were one of the premier snow removal and property maintenance companies in the region, with a reputation for quality work and professional integrity. And it all might not have happened if Karren Kimble hadn't decided to fine me for snow on my roof, unaware that I owned the company that kept her streets clear. Her attempt to abuse her authority and punish me had backfired spectacularly, costing her $50,000, her position as HOA president, her reputation in the community, and ultimately her home in Cascade Ridge. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every time she drove on the streets that my company plowed that winter, she was literally using the services of the person she had tried to destroy. Every time she walked safely on cleared sidewalks or parked in a snow-free lot, she was benefiting from the work I made possible. I wondered if she ever thought about that, if she ever made the connection. Probably not. People like Karren rarely engage in that kind of self-reflection. They see themselves as perpetual victims, never understanding that their problems are largely self-inflicted. But I didn't waste much energy thinking about Karren Kimble. I had a business to run, a community to serve, and a life to live. The HOA drama was behind me, relegated to a strange chapter in my story that I would sometimes share over beers with friends who needed a reminder that standing up for yourself is always worth it. The following spring, I attended the annual HOA meeting. Bob Morris gave a report on the state of the community, highlighting improved resident satisfaction, streamlined processes for addressing concerns, and strong financial performance. He specifically mentioned Alpine Solutions as an exemplary contractor and thanked us for our continued excellent service. After the meeting, several people came up to shake my hand and thank me again for standing up to Karren. A few joked that I should run for the HOA board myself. "Not a chance," I said with a laugh. "I'll serve this community by keeping the streets clear and the snow managed. You all can handle the politics." On my drive home that evening, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past year. It had been stressful and expensive and time-consuming, but I had learned valuable lessons. I learned that documentation is everything, that the truth is a powerful defense, and that standing up to bullies often reveals that they're not as powerful as they pretend to be. I also learned that communities are stronger when people hold their leaders accountable, when they demand transparency and fairness, and when they don't allow petty tyrants to run roughshod over basic principles of justice and equity. Karren Kimble had tried to use the HOA as a weapon against me, but in the end, the HOA's own rules and procedures were what brought her down. The system worked, not because it was perfect, but because enough people cared to make it work. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed that my neighbor across the street had put up new solar panels. Good for him. Under the old regime, Karren probably would have made his life hell over it. Under the new leadership, homeowners had the freedom to improve their properties without fear of arbitrary retaliation. That was worth fighting for. That was worth standing up for, even when it would have been easier to just pay the fines and move on. I went inside my house, poured myself a drink, and sat on my back deck watching the sun set over the mountains. Life was good. Business was booming. The community was thriving. And somewhere in Grand Junction, Karren Kimble was probably stewing over what might have been if she had just treated people fairly and exercised her authority with wisdom instead of spite. I raised my glass to the mountains and to second chances and to the simple truth that what goes around comes around. Karren had tried to bury me under unjust fines and harassment, never suspecting that the man she was targeting controlled the very service that kept her community functioning through the harsh Colorado winters. That had been her fatal mistake. Not just targeting me specifically, but failing to understand that in a real community, we're all connected. We all depend on each other in ways big and small. The person you try to hurt today might be the person you need tomorrow. The small business owner you harass might be providing essential services that you take for granted. Karren learned that lesson the hard way, and it cost her dearly. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply continuing to do excellent work and letting the truth speak for itself. The next winter came with even heavier snow than the year before. Alpine Solutions was ready, our expanded fleet and trained crews handling every storm with efficiency and professionalism. The streets of Cascade Ridge were always clear, the sidewalks always safe, and the community always grateful. And my roof, I kept it clear of excessive snow accumulation, not because I was afraid of violations, but because it was the right thing to do. But I noticed something interesting. Several of my neighbors let the snow pile up much higher than I ever had, and nobody said a word. No violations, no fines, no harassment. That was the difference between enforcing rules fairly and using rules as weapons. The current HOA board focused on genuine safety issues and community concerns, not on finding excuses to punish people they didn't like. One February evening, as my crews were wrapping up after a major storm, Marcus and I drove through Cascade Ridge inspecting our work. Everything was perfect. The streets gleamed with fresh asphalt visible through the cleared snow. The parking areas were accessible. The walking paths were safe. "We do good work," Marcus said. "We do," I agreed. "And we do it the right way." "Think Karren ever figured out that you owned Alpine Solutions before she started messing with you?" I laughed. "I honestly don't know. Maybe she knew and thought she could force the HOA to fire us. Maybe she didn't know and it was just terrible luck on her part. Either way, it worked out. More than worked out. We're crushing it, boss. Best year we've ever had. That's because we focus on doing excellent work and treating people right. Turns out that's a pretty good business strategy." We finished the inspection and headed back to the office. As I drove through the community I called home, I felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. Not because I had defeated Karren Kimble, though that was gratifying in its own way, but because I had built something worthwhile, created jobs, provided essential services, and contributed positively to my community. That was the real victory. Not the settlement money or the vindication or even the growth of my business. The real victory was knowing that I had maintained my integrity throughout the entire ordeal, that I had fought fair, and that I had come out the other side with my reputation and my principles intact. Karren had lost everything she cared about, her authority, her position, her reputation, her home, all because she couldn't resist the temptation to abuse her power. Meanwhile, I had gained business, respect, and a stronger connection to my community, all because I refused to be bullied and had the courage to stand up for what was right. There's a lesson in that somewhere, though I suspect Karren never learned it. Some people go through their whole lives blaming others for their problems, never recognizing that they're the common denominator in all their conflicts and failures. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Karren Kimble was gone, her reign of petty tyranny over, and Cascade Ridge was better for it. The HOA functioned properly now, serving homeowners instead of harassing them, and my company continued to provide the services that kept the community safe and accessible through the harsh mountain winters. Sometimes justice really does prevail. Sometimes the bully really does get what's coming to them. And sometimes the person they tried to crush ends up thriving, stronger and more successful than before. As I locked up the office that night and headed home, I thought about writing up the whole experience as a cautionary tale, maybe posting it online where other people dealing with HOA harassment could find some guidance and inspiration. But then, I decided against it. I had lived it, learned from it, and moved on. That was enough. The snow kept falling throughout that winter and the winters that followed. My crews kept the streets clear, my business kept growing, and life in Cascade Ridge kept getting better. The HOA board continued to operate with transparency and fairness, and homeowners finally felt like the association was working for them instead of against them. And me, I just kept doing what I had always done. Running my business with integrity, treating people with respect, and standing up for myself when necessary. That's all anyone can really do in this world. The rest just works itself out. Sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully, but eventually the truth comes to light. The bullies face consequences, and the people who do things the right way find success. That was my experience anyway, and I considered myself lucky for it. Not everyone who stands up to a bully wins. Not every HOA horror story has a happy ending, but mine did, and I was grateful for that. Grateful for the lessons learned, the relationships built, and the satisfaction of knowing that when I was tested, I didn't back down. I stood firm, I played by the rules, and I came out on top. That's worth more than any settlement check or contract renewal. That's the kind of victory that stays with you, that builds character, that makes you stronger for whatever challenges come next. And in the end, that's what really mattered. Not that I won and Karren lost, but that I stayed true to my principles throughout the entire ordeal and came through it with my integrity intact. Everything else, the business success, the community respect, the personal vindication, was just icing on the cake.